My name is Marissa. Welcome here. Welcome to my first YouTube video. I'm going to be sharing with you in this video 4 of my favorite sourdough recipes. These are some of our recipes that I make the most often on a very regular basis. I'll be making our favorite basic sourdough bread loaf, or at least the current version. I'm always experimenting with this. And if you come from my old channel, you'll remember that I've been experimenting with this a bit, and it's going to continue here. I'm also going to be making some hamburger buns, some muffins, and cookies. So right here, I'm starting off by feeding my sourdough starter. I am feeding it the night before I plan to do my main baking day. And these projects always span over the course of a few different days, just because that's the nature of sourdough, especially this time of year when the weather is cooler, the house is not super warm. We do have plans to put in a wood-burning stove insert into our fireplace area that we have, and we're hoping to do that pretty soon, but we don't have it in yet. And I know that once we have that going, it'll change things. It'll be warmer yet in here. But our kitchen is a little under 70 degrees in the winter time, and so it just is a little on the cooler side as far as sourdough rising and everything. So I keep my sourdough starter in the refrigerator most of the time. I take it out to bake with it about once a week, sometimes less if life gets really busy. It's one of the things I love about how flexible this is. You can just set that sourdough starter into the fridge and let it sit, and then when you're ready to start baking, you can take it out and get going again. So for a while we were super busy with redoing our kitchen, moving right before that into this house, having a new baby in the spring of last year, all of that was just a lot. And so I wasn't baking the sourdough very much. I would take it out now and then and just do the really easy stuff like sourdough discard pancakes or waffles. And that's what I did for the most part. But now I'm really loving getting back into baking on a more regular basis. And so I have been doing it more like once a week, and then it just goes in the fridge. So I'm just mixing up my sourdough starter with spelt, a little bit of rye, and then letting that sit in a bowl. And then I put my main sourdough starter back into the fridge at that point. The next day, I'm ready to start baking, and I'm going to start with my bread loaves. I'm going to be doing 3 different bread loaves, kind of experimenting again, like I was saying, with some different ancient grains. I'm going to be using some spelt and kamut in combination, also just kamut, and then a loaf that has mostly all-purpose flour and some kamut. So kamut is an ancient grain. It's a very ancient form of wheat. It's always organic. It's never been hybridized, never GMO, and it has a really great nutrient profile. It also has a really nice nutty texture, and it's also lighter when it comes to a whole grain flour, so it's still very pleasant to have in a bread. It's not heavy or anything, and it just has a lot of great benefits. So I am experimenting with this. I also love spelt. So when I feed my sourdough starter, I feed it with mostly spelt and then a little bit of rye. The rye has a lot of great benefits that help to neutralize the phytic acid when the sourdough is fermenting. So that's why I like to include that. It has a lot of something called phytase, which helps against the phytic acid to break it down, neutralize it so it's not an issue. And so that's why I like to do that. So I feed my sourdough starter with that so that I know that anytime I'm using my sourdough starter, I'm also getting some spelt and some rye in whatever I'm making, even if the rest of the recipe is totally all-purpose flour. So here I am just getting those bread recipes going. I start with water, I'm weighing that out, and then I'm adding my different flours. So you'll get to see how these different loaves turn out as you keep watching. It's really interesting to see how the different flours and different combinations turn out in different various types of loaves. Now, some of the recipes that I'm making are my own recipes. Some of them are from somebody else, and instead of reading off all the exact measurements. I'm going to put links down in the description box for all the recipes that I'm using today, whether they're somebody else's or mine. And then that way you can find the measurements and make it yourself the most easy way. I know that trying to write down recipes while watching a video can be pretty tedious, so I always like providing the written version whenever I can. At this point in the recipe, I'm adding my sourdough starter and salt. I have to say that I did think it was way too tedious for a long time to weigh out ingredients, but now that I jumped in and am doing it, I actually really like it. I actually find it's easier, it's more accurate, and it's not hard at all. I just keep a little scale in one of my drawers where I have other baking equipment, and it's super easy to just pull it out, keep your bowl on top, and I always zero it out after each addition so I don't have to worry about adding or anything. So I highly recommend weighing ingredients for baking if you haven't tried that. I love how popular sourdough has become recently. I know that while people were home a lot during 2020 and all of that was going on then, people really got into sourdough, and I thought that was so great. There were some really great things that came out of that time, and staying home and making things from scratch was one of those things that got really popular. And I have some thoughts on that. So I don't think there's any shame in either making stuff yourself or, if you need to, buying things. So like I said, for a long time, I just stuck to the easy sourdough things that were pretty much sourdough discard recipes, waffles, pancakes, things like that, and occasionally I would make something more. But life was so busy. So I have 5 kids. The youngest is 9 months and the oldest is 10. And whenever a baby starts to get closer to that 1 year mark, that's when I feel life getting a little bit calmer, sleep is getting a little bit better, and life is just a little bit less intense. And that's always when I find myself going back to things that take a little bit more time, like making bread and doing more recipes and more things from scratch. So for our basic meals, I like to primarily make everything from scratch, but to do that, I keep everything very simple and doable, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of those kinds of recipes and cooking on this channel. But I did want to mention that for a long time, I did buy sourdough bread. I bought it from a company called Organic Bread of Heaven, and I'll actually have a link to them as well down in the description box in case you're interested. But for any very, very busy seasons of life, like having a new baby, buying and selling houses, moving, all of that kind of stuff, I found them so helpful because it's just like sourdough that you would make from home. They have sprouted, spelt sourdough breads and buns and lots of different things. So that's a great resource. And I want everyone to feel like there's no shame in buying some things. The priority is always doing the best that you can. And, when it comes to health, stress is not helpful at all. So doing absolutely the best that you can with food, but it's okay to not make everything yourself all the time. As much as you can, I think that's always great. But the thing that I like to kind of go with is make what you enjoy and then buy what you don't want to make or don't have time to make, because there's so many good options for good, high quality things that you can get that are just like what you would make at home these days, which I love that movement is growing as well. People are kind of waking up and being more aware of how important what you eat, what a big impact that makes on how you feel and your well-being. And so that's becoming a lot more popular to just have a lot healthier, real food versions. So just wanted to put that out there. And as I'm doing the voiceover for this, I'm watching myself doing the stretch and folds for the sourdough loaves. And I have learned a lot since even filming this video not that long ago, because I've made several more batches of these sourdough bread loaves since then, and it's like, I should not be pushing that down. I should be stretching it up as best I can, and then just folding it over, not pressing it down. But as you can see, the different flours really tend to make the loaves different as far as handling. The camlet and spelt version was stickier. It sort of stretched okay. The only camlet loaf was not very stretchy. And then of course the one with all-purpose flour is the stretchiest and easiest to work with. Also, my sourdough starter has become more and more active the more that I've been using it over these last several, I don't know, month and a half or so since I've been more consistent at using it. And so the things that I've been baking more recently, even after filming this video, have risen a lot more nicely. And so those are just funny things. Just you get better at this as you go. So I guess my point in even making a video when I'm still experimenting with these bread loaves and these different types of flours is it's okay. Like, they turned out great. We loved eating them. They tasted really good. My kids liked them. They weren't the most beautiful or perfect looking loaves, but they were great. They were homemade bread. They tasted good. They fulfilled a great purpose. And then you just get better. Like, you'll see in videos that I do after this one how much better the bread loaves start looking, and I learn more things. So that's kind of fun. Now, this next recipe that I'm doing here are my homemade sourdough hamburger buns. And this is a really easy recipe. I designed this one a number of years ago, and it's on my website, bumblebeeapothecary.com. I will also have a link to it, like I said, in the description below, but it's really easy. It just takes some flour, sourdough starter, honey, salt, and you mix that together. And then those just get to sit and rise for a while, and then later on I will take them and shape them into buns. The next thing that I'm putting together during this sourdough baking time is some sourdough cookies. So these are sourdough chocolate chip cookies, and I like to kind of change the different flours that I use depending on the type of recipe. So anytime when it's already a darker colored recipe, for example, nobody really minds if chocolate chip cookies or muffins or ginger molasses cookies or things like that are darker in color, I like to use whole grains. So I find that einkorn flour, a whole einkorn flour, is really nice for these types of recipes because it's a more delicate one. It doesn't have as much of a gluten structure. It's nice for lightweight, delicate baked goods. If I was doing a cake that was sourdough and whole grain, that's what I would choose as well. And so I like to use that. So that's what I'm doing for my cookies, and then I'll also use it for the muffins that I do later. I do love grinding my own flour, but like I've mentioned, life has been pretty busy lately, and so I haven't been grinding as much of my own flour recently. So again, that's another thing, you just do the best that you can with what you have, and I just have been getting whole grain ground flours from Azure Standard, and I know it's more ideal to have them freshly ground because the nutrients are more intact and fresh, and that they do you do lose some of that when the flours sit, but it's still better to be making this yourself at home with high quality whole grain ground flours versus other alternatives. So I'm okay with it. Like I said, doing the best we can here. But back to these cookies. So this is someone else's recipe that I'll have linked down below. And I also like to use my sucanat. So it's just dehydrated cane crystals. It's very brown, but it's got all the minerals. Nothing has been refined or taken away. And so I love using that as often as I can. In fact, I'll use it pretty much anytime I'm making a sweet dessert. And it works very well in any type of recipe that's already darker colored. And even if it does make some things a little darker colored that would normally be lighter if they were made with refined sugar, I'm okay with that. I just go ahead and use it anyway because the benefits are so great. That's one of the things about having refined sugars is that when you take the color away, you take away the nutrients, the vitamins, and the minerals. When our body digests things like sugar, it actually uses up a lot of magnesium, for example, just to be able to process sugar in the body. And the interesting thing is, cane sugar, when it's grown, it has all of the magnesium and the other vitamins and minerals that the body needs to digest it already right there in it. It's when we strip those away and refine it just because we want the white color that we lose those. But when we use a whole sucanat, where all of those vitamins and minerals have not been taken away, then our body has what it needs to be able to process that sugar without having to pull that magnesium from other parts of the body. I know that a lot of people have noticed how they don't feel great, or their kids don't feel great, and different behaviors will be more of an issue after they have sugary foods with refined sugar. And I think that's so interesting because a lot of those symptoms can be traced to magnesium deficiency or just mineral deficiency in general. And so when we're eating a whole food like the sucanat where all the vitamins and minerals are there, that doesn't happen because the body has what it needs to digest it. I just think that's so interesting. There's such wisdom already in how things are grown. So once this cookie dough is all mixed together, then it just has to sit for a while, and that's when the sourdough fermentation happens. So I just let that sit on the counter for half a day, usually half a day, most of the day, something like that. And then I will move it to the refrigerator because it's a lot easier to work with when it is in the refrigerator for a while and nice and chilled. The next recipe that I'm making is the sourdough muffins, and this is another recipe that it's based on one that's not my own, but I kind of tweak it to make it my own. So I will link the one down below. This is one, like I said, that I love to use whole einkorn flour in for the benefits, and it just fits nicely. Nobody minds that it's all whole grain in a recipe like this. I'm not against all-purpose flour, like I've said before. I think it has a place. There's even different thoughts, different schools of thought, really, about whole grains versus all-purpose flour where the bran and everything has been removed. So the bran, when people don't have a healthy digestive system, is what causes the problems. The bran and the germ is also where the nutrients are. So oftentimes people will do well with a sourdough whole grain because all of that anti-nutrients and everything is broken down and the nutrients are unlocked, easier to digest, all of that kind of thing. But some people find that they would rather just do an all-purpose flour and then get their nutrients from other foods, like animal foods. So there's different ways to think about it. I kind of go back and forth. I just like to include both. I do some recipes with some all-purpose flour. I do lots of recipes with whole grains. Like I said, my sourdough starter is whole grain, spelt, and rye. And so I'm always getting that no matter what. And yeah, that's just what I've decided because it is kind of a hot topic. But anyway, back to this sourdough muffin recipe. The ways that I change it are that I use my whole wheat or whole einkorn flour. I don't use oil, I use melted butter, and then I've just been doing it the basic way with the cinnamon. So those are the tweaks that I make to this recipe. And then into the oven these go, and that's one of the things that I always love about making homemade things and baked goods is that it feels very cozy, especially in the winter, to have something baking, a few different things coming out of the oven. I know that my family gets very excited whenever we have fresh things and new things to eat, and it makes it really nice. It's so fun. Now at this point in the day, or the next day rather, we are ready to work with our bread dough. So here you can see that these are not soft and springy like they would be with all-purpose flour. They're a bit stiffer. They're okay. Like the sourdough has risen pretty well, but that's just the way it is when you're using more whole grains. So I'm trying to kind of keep them lighter while also shape them. This is another thing that I've learned a lot more about in the next couple of batches of bread loaves that I've done since filming this, is that you really do need to be intentional about shaping the bottom of the loaf. So I need to be pulling those sides toward me and kind of bringing them together. Not super easy with the very stiff ones, but you do kind of need to shape them. Another thing that I've done is I've invested in more bread making equipment that I don't have yet in this filming of this video, but you'll see that in more videos that I do. So I got some of the little baskets that have cloth in them to let the dough rise in for its final rise after it's been shaped instead of these bowls, and that has made a huge difference. So you'll see when these come out that these are more flat. They don't rise up into a nice dome. But that's okay. Like I said, they're still very tasty. We still enjoyed them and ate them up, still providing fresh homemade sourdough bread for our family, so it's okay. But I did find that with the loaves where I rose them in the new baskets with the cloth that were designed for rising sourdough loaves, they kept a much nicer shape, and they did rise up nice and round, and it was just really fun to see that getting some good equipment is not necessary. Like, I've baked for how many years without those things? I just recently got them. But it is fun just to see things turn out a little bit more successful when you do have good equipment. Another thing that I invested in was a little knife for making the scoring marks on the tops of the loaves. You'll see later on that I just use a little kitchen knife to do this, and it works okay, but the little knife works a lot better. The next thing that I'm working with is my dough for my sourdough hamburger buns. So I am cutting it into the different pieces that I'm going to need, and then I'm going to be shaping those into little bun shapes and putting those onto a baking sheet so that they can do their final rise. Now we're into yet another day in this process. The second rise of the sourdough bread loaves took quite a while in the refrigerator, and now they are ready to bake. So we're going to get those out, we're going to score them, we are going to bake them in the oven in our cast iron Dutch oven. And as you can see, like I said, it's a very flat shaped dough. It's not nicely round like they would be if they were in the little baskets that are made for rising sourdough bread loaves, but that's okay. Just stay tuned. In future videos you'll see much nicer shaped bread loaves. So here it is coming out of the oven. This one got a little darker than anticipated. So some of the recipes that I've been basing my versions of those recipes on have a lot longer second bake time with the lid off of the Dutch oven. I find that my loaves really do okay at just 10 minutes rather than the 25 that they say. It took me a little bit to figure that out though, so you can see that these are a little on the dark side, but I do adjust that as I go. The sourdough hamburger buns are also finished with their second rise. This recipe is funny. Depending on what type of flour I use in them, they rise differently. So this time I just had a dry towel on top instead of a damp towel or something that would have kept in moisture. So they rose very, very tall. They didn't really spread out side to side. That's okay. It still works for a burger. So I have an egg yolk and milk mixture here that I am brushing over the top of them, and then I'm going to sprinkle sesame seeds on the top. I just think that makes them look extra fancy, and you know for sure that you're having a hamburger bun when they have those on them. And then once these are ready and all sprinkled, they are going to go into the oven and they're going to bake, and we'll take those out when they're finished. And now we are working on our cookies. So this dough sat out for part of the day at room temperature, and then I put it into the refrigerator. It's been in there overnight, into this day a bit. So it's nice and chilled, easy to work with, so you can just take little balls and put them onto the baking sheets. Speaking of baking sheets, I love these stainless steel ones. I know that aluminum cookware is just everywhere, but I like to avoid aluminum just out of concerns for possible toxicity. So I highly prefer stainless steel when it comes to cooking. And I found these on Amazon if you're looking for some. If you just search stainless steel bakeware, baking sheets, things like that, you'll be able to find them. There's a variety of sizes. I have these ones, and I also have some other ones with a little bit taller sides. I will put links to the ones that I have if you're interested in these exact ones, but highly recommend Amazon for things like this that are a little bit harder to find in usual stores. So here are the cookies out of the oven. They turned out great. They smell so good, and they're so delicious when they're still warm out of the oven or later on when they've cooled. Really wonderful with a nice glass of raw milk. And here we go, there's everything that we made. I hope that you enjoyed coming along and watching as much as I enjoyed making these. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!